How do I request a reasonable accommodation at work?
People with disabilities who are facing an obstacle at any stage of the employment process because of their disability can ask their employer for a change to a policy, work environment, or how things are done. This is called a reasonable accommodation request. The accommodation is the change that you're asking for if it's needed because of a disability and would not be an undue hardship for the employer, then the accommodation would be considered reasonable. If you're facing an obstacle at work because of your disability, it's up to you, the employee, to request what is needed.
Legally, there is no set way you have to make your request. However, it is best practice to 1. Make the request in writing, either a letter or an email. This avoids miscommunication and creates a record you can refer back to. And 2. Make it clear that this is a disability-related request. Explain how the functional limitations caused by your disability are making specific aspects of your job difficult, what exactly you need as a reasonable accommodation to improve the situation, and how the requested reasonable accommodation could help. Where you send your reasonable accommodation request depends on where you work. If you are a government employee, you should contact your ADA or 504 coordinator. Otherwise, contact your Human Resources Department.
Some employers may ask employees to make requests for reasonable accommodations on a standardized form or follow a very structured process. Review your employee handbook or talk to your HR representative to know the protocol that is used in your workplace. Whether you are writing a letter or filling in a form, the information you want to include is the same. Remember that you have the right to ask for a reasonable accommodation at any stage of the employment process, including when you apply for a job, interview for a job, do the job, or enjoy the benefits and privileges of employment, like a staff retreat or work-sponsored events.
If you aren't sure what specific accommodation to ask for, start by thinking about what specific challenges you are having at work, how they're connected to your disability, and what you think your employer could do to help you overcome that challenge. You do not need to disclose your specific medical diagnosis when making your request. Instead, focus on the functional limitations or specific symptoms that are making it difficult for you to do your job.
Keep in mind that your employer doesn't necessarily know much about your disability or how it can affect your work life. It is your job to explain how your disability-related limitations affect you at work and how a reasonable accommodation can help. You want your request to clearly outline the link from your disability-related limitations to the accommodation you are requesting, while not implying problems or sharing details you might be uncomfortable with later. The goal is to show that you can perform the essential functions of your job with the accommodation you requested, and that the requested accommodation is reasonable.
If your disability-related need is not known or obvious to your employer, they can ask for supporting documentation from a medical provider. However, don't rely on a medical provider to make your request for you. Your request should come from you because you know your disability and day-to-day job duties best. A helpful doctor's letter of support will verify that you have specific functional limitations and you can perform your essential job duties with the requested accommodation. Beware of your doctor's letter overstating your limitations.
Whether you are using the employer's forms or writing a letter or email, here are 6 best practices for making a reasonable accommodation request. Number 1, identify yourself as a person with a disability. You do not have to include your specific diagnosis. Number 2, identify the specific job tasks that are being affected. 3, explain how your functional limitations or symptoms affect these tasks. You only need to mention the limitations or symptoms that are relevant to your request. 4, state what accommodation you're requesting. Explain how your requested accommodation will be workable and allow you to perform your job duties fully or to have equal access to employment benefits. If you think your employer will have concerns about providing the accommodation, address those concerns upfront. 5. Guide your doctor in writing a helpful letter of support. Discussing your job duties and sharing your draft requests with your doctor helps them write a letter verifying your functional limitations without risking your job. And 6, request a timely response from your employer by specifying a date. Usually this could be 1 to 2 weeks from your request.
Let's take a look at an example. James, a retail associate, has called MOD for help putting together his reasonable accommodation request. Example, James.
Hi, my name is James, and I work as a retail associate at a clothing store. I'm diabetic, and I've been diagnosed with depression. My feet have been hurting me while I'm at work, and I'd like to request a chair at work, but I'm really not sure how to do that.
Hi, thanks for calling MOD. You can ask for a chair as a reasonable accommodation request. To do that, you'll need to clarify a few things. First, you need to explain what symptoms you're having that are affecting your work. What symptoms of your diabetes and depression create a need for a chair?
Well, my diabetes causes neuropathy, which is numbness in my feet. Since my job has me standing a lot, my feet swell and I hurt, and when I have to stand for a long time.
Okay, so it sounds like the depression is not creating difficulties at your job, so you don't need to mention that at all in your request. But can you tell me a little bit more about what you do on a day-to-day basis at work?
Oh, sure thing. In my role, I mostly handle customer transactions at the checkout. I neatly refold tried-on clothes. I restock the sales floor, and I also ensure that the dressing rooms are well maintained and organized.
All right, so can you tell me a little bit more about when and where you would need the chair? Do you need it for all of the job tasks that we talked about throughout the whole day or only for part of the day?
Oh, I think I could sit while ringing customers up and folding clothes. My feet start to hurt after standing for roughly about more than 3 hours. I think I could sit in a chair for short periods throughout the day, and I'd be able to perform all my job tasks.
That sounds good. Thanks for sharing all those details. So let's put this all together into a reasonable accommodation request email.
Sure. Here's what I was thinking. Dear Human Resources, I'm writing to request a reasonable accommodation due to a disability-related difficulty at work. I have a disability that causes swelling, pain, and numbness in my feet when I stand for long periods of time. As you know, my job as a retail associate involves a lot of standing. I'd like to request a chair to sit in while ringing customers up and folding clothes. This would adequately alleviate my symptoms, and I would still be able to restock inventory and clean out the dressing rooms while standing. I'm happy to provide a letter of support from my doctor verifying my symptoms and that the chair would help. I love working for the store and believe that providing this accommodation would assist me in performing my essential job functions and continuing to be a productive team member. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Otherwise, I would like to request a response by next Friday.
James's request successfully links his diabetes-related symptoms, numbness in his feet, to the challenge he's having at work, standing for long periods of time, and the need for the reasonable accommodation. He has made the case that a chair will alleviate his symptoms without removing or significantly interfering with any of his job duties. Note that he did not need to disclose his medical diagnosis of diabetes in order to effectively make his request.
Standing is an essential part of James's job. If James's request implied that he could never stand, he could risk losing his job. James was able to explain that, although he has difficulty standing for long periods, he would still be able to perform his essential job functions with the reasonable accommodation.
Once you make your request, your employer will evaluate it and make a decision. They may want to discuss it with you first to get a better understanding of your request and talk about different reasonable accommodation options.
For individualized guidance, visit mass.gov/mod/ContactUs or call 617-727-7440. This video provides an introductory overview. Employment situations are often complicated and depend a lot on details of the situation. Please visit mass.gov/mod/DisabilityRights for more details on when and how the ADA applies. None of our content should be considered legal advice.